So this is what you're going to be getting in your CNC speed trigger for the Wolverine MTW. Of course, the actual speed trigger itself with the set screws already installed. Of course, if you ordered the aluminium version or a different color Cerakote, your trigger will of course be a different color. In the package is also included the proper size Allen key for adjusting the set screws. It comes with a little spacer to go between the trigger and the trigger board. You get these little clips. You should only need one, but because they are a bit fragile, I included two of them. The position where these go is on the front pin that holds the trigger board. To replace the original trigger spring, these just click right on the pin and they will hold it in place like that. Besides that, you get 3 springs with it. You get a hard one, a medium, and a very soft one. Of course, you gotta check which one you personally prefer, and you can go from there. Okay, so before we get to actually installing the new trigger, we will need to take out the old one, of course. Now this isn't very hard. As you see, I took out all the non-essentials from my MTW. You do not have to do it this far. You can simply take off the upper receiver so you will have enough place to work with, and that should be plenty to get out the trigger board. Now, to get started, first thing you want to do, you can see that, let me grab the Allen key, will be easier. You can see the trigger spring in here. It's latched behind the trigger. You can simply push that to the side and it will come undone. Now you won't have any more pressure on the front pin that holds the trigger in place. So you can simply slide that out. Next thing you want to do, right on top of the trigger, there will be an Allen screw. You can undo it. You don't need to undo it all the way. Just a little bit will be enough to get the play on the other body pin, and it will also slide right out. Next thing, and this is not a must, but I like to do it anyway. I like to put the fire selector in full auto. And the reason for this, I don't know how well you're going to be able to see, but because of the cutout in the selector, it will give the switch on the board just a bit more space to wiggle around. Again, it's not a must, but it helps to keep the pin protected on the board when you take out the trigger board. So now you can simply pull out the board. Be careful. If it's getting stuck somewhere, please pay attention so you don't break anything. Also, as you can see, the spring from my board came off of the board. Don't get worried, this is not the end of the world. We can easily fix this later on. Don't worry about it for now. Next thing, you want to wiggle out the trigger, which will come out pretty easy as well. And that's pretty much it for the disassembly part. Before we get to the actual installation of the speed trigger, I will first explain what the screws on this trigger actually do. Much like the original, you will see that some of the screws will actually match. There will be a tiny little set screw right on top of here. This one doesn't have it installed right now, but I'll grab that in a second. Come on, focus there. Yes. Right in the back, you have a set screw. This is the same function as the original trigger with the set screw. This is to adjust how much play the trigger will have until it hits the switch on the board. The added screw in front will control the over travel, so you can protect the trigger switch and guarantee a faster reset. On top of that, this also works as a guide for the trigger springs, so you can simply slide those on. Next thing that you might have noticed is this little silver screw here. The purpose of this screw is to set the point where the trigger will actually engage the switch on the trigger board. So as you can see, the silver piece, because it is adjustable, you can set how much play your trigger will have before it engages the switch. What this allows you to do is to keep a working safety, but also make it that as soon as you flick off the safety of the MTW, it really only needs like a hair pull to engage that switch. So that's the main perk of this trigger. Now, when you are installing the trigger, I suggest you don't pay too much attention to the outer two screws, as these are for later adjusting the trigger. First thing you want to do is mess around with this little screw to make sure you have the trigger set to a position where you like the pull for the safe to work as well. I tried to set all of them to a basic value that should somewhat work, but of course it's gonna need some fine tuning, so fiddle around with that first. When you go to install the actual speed trigger into the MTW, it's pretty much the same setup as you would normally do with the stock trigger. Simply put the trigger in, get the body pin that holds the trigger, slide it in just a little bit so the trigger will actually stay in position. Get your board. Of course, yours will probably still have the spring on it. Again, be careful. I like to set the selector to the full auto position for this. And also don't forget about your bolt catch. It's very easy to knock off one of these switches from the board, so pay attention to that. Get the board gently past the trigger. It's maybe a little bit of fiddling around, but it should work just fine. Again, pay good attention to where the board is located so you don't mess around any of the switches. Once the board is in place, you want to insert the front body pin. And let me quickly grab a screw. This will be pre-installed in your trigger. You can undo it if you want to. Just make sure the pin will pass through. Come on. Just like the stock trigger, this is just to keep the speed trigger in place on the body pin. So that's what you want to secure first. So now we have the trigger installed. What I like to do is put the MTW in safe and see when you press the trigger, because of course there's no springs in it or anything. When you press the trigger, see if in safe it will engage the switch. In this case it doesn't, which is nice. Now we put it on semi and I can feel it just engaging the switch on the board. So what we could do in this case, if you remember the little tiny little set screw that engages the switch, you could twist it out just a little bit to get a bit more play on it. All depends on personal preference, but make sure to check it with the safety. Now once we have this installed and you have your over travel and pre-travel set to the values of your liking, you of course want to install the whole trigger more permanently. Now for this, I'll take out the trigger to quickly show you guys. loosening the screw. In the package, you guys received 2 of these little clips and a washer. The washer is meant to sit in between the trigger and the actual trigger board. So make sure you do not forget it. If you do notice after installing this with the spring that you are getting a bit of resistance, that it doesn't like to reset as nicely, what might be the case is that your spacer will have a slight deviation. What you could do to fix it is either see if it works for you without the spacer. In some cases I've seen it does, some it doesn't. Also what might help is to slightly sand it and everything will be smooth. Now as for the other clip that I was talking about, the original trigger spring is meant to hold the trigger in place, of course, but also to hold on to that front body pin. So this will hold the pin in. Because we are not using the stock trigger spring but a different spring, we will need to figure out something else to hold it in place. So what I've come up with are these little clamps. They don't need much force, they simply quite easily slide into the notch on the pin. Again, they don't need force, be careful with them. I supplied 2 because I know they are a bit fragile, so please pay attention. Let's see, one more little trick. Where did I put the spring? There it is. When you are trying to install the trigger with all the clips and everything, this is what you should only do once you are happy with the tuning of the trigger you have. What you want to do to make it a bit easier on yourself, put the spring on top of the guide, the set screw, and I like to insert it upside down to keep the spring in place so you don't have to fiddle around, or I've seen some people try a dab of glue. I would not recommend any of that. So simply upside down, inserting the trigger pin, and it should be good to go. That's it. If you have any questions, send me a message on either Instagram or on YouTube, and I'll be glad to help you out. Have a nice day.